Hey, Rocky Fork, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will stay connected by downloading our app.
I saw the disappointment when the video wasn't up there. I had to, yeah. Good morning. My name is Chris. I'm one of the ministers here at Rocky Fork. And I'm glad to be with you this morning. And we are in week 3 of our Jesus Next Door sermon series. And we've been talking all about how to be a better neighbor. We're going to start reading the book, Jesus Next Door, tomorrow. It's a 30-day prayer guide. So we're going to spend the month of May reading about what it means to be a good neighbor, what it means to be like Jesus to the people around you. So that's where we're going to start, and we have books available in the Welcome Center. We would love for you to join us in reading that, but we're going to continue with the sermon series. We've been priming the pump the past couple of weeks, talking really about the why we do what we do. Why we do what we do. What's our mission? What's our purpose? And it's to make disciples. It's to bring people closer to Jesus. And that's kind of the motivation behind everything that we do. And so the question the first week was, what are we doing to accomplish that mission? And we talked about the Good Samaritan and how Jesus expects us as his followers to be a good neighbor to people wherever we are. It doesn't matter where we are. He expects us to be a good neighbor. So last week, we spent a little bit of time just talking about how Jesus was a good neighbor. How would life be better if Jesus was your neighbor's neighbor, right? How would life be better for them? And other than the fact that, well, it's Jesus, right? I am not that. I am not Jesus, so of course their life will be better if Jesus lived next door to them. But we asked that question, and what we focused on was how Jesus behaves, how he acts, what he does. And what we found was that Jesus was always focused on the mission. He was full of compassion for the lost and always available to them, and that we can be the same way. So if I could just put that all together in a neat little package, Jesus calls his followers to be good neighbors. That's what he does. That's what he expects of us, and he showed us how to do it. It's that simple. So this week, I want to look at how God responds to us. I want to look at how he responds to us, the things that go on in our lives. Remember, our purpose is to make disciples, but how does God respond to us in the ways we're doing things? And we saw last week that Jesus was often moved by compassion, right? What is it that drives that compassion? Of course he has compassion for the lost. But what is it that breaks God's heart, right? What is it that hurts him at his core? And so I want to look at that. What pulls his heartstrings? And then, you know, we sing this song, "Break my heart for what breaks yours, Lord." I want us to be there. The things that break God's heart should break our heart. So let's take a look at some of those things that break God's heart and how he responds. And we're going to start in Genesis chapter 6. So we're going to start with the story of the flood. And so let's look at the first 5 chapters of Genesis real quick. Let me give you a summary. God created. He breathed into existence the heavens and the earth, all that is in them. He breathed into being man and woman. And they were together, and there was harmony, and it was good. Everything was perfect. And then the serpent comes in, and he deceives Adam and Eve, and they sin. And then they're kicked out of the garden. And everything is not so good. And that separation from God causes problems. And Adam and Eve continue in sin. And so they have kids, Cain and Abel. Cain is jealous of his brother and kills him. Sin runs deep. Chapter 5 of Genesis is a genealogy from Adam to this guy named Noah. And it runs through hundreds and hundreds of years. And in those hundreds of years, that separation between God and man just continued to widen. The chasm became deeper and deeper and deeper, and man slipped further into sin. And that's where we find ourselves in Genesis chapter 6. So starting in verse 5 says this: "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The Lord regretted that he had made human beings on the earth, and his heart was deeply troubled." His heart was deeply troubled. What breaks God's heart? "So the Lord said, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, and with them the animals, the birds, the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." The thing that breaks God's heart is evil. It is wickedness. It is sin. What's God's response to those things? He is prepared to wipe out what he has made, clean the slate, and start over. He is creator. He can do that. My mom used to say to me, "I brought you into this world, I can take you out." That's where God's at. And I was being an angel. I don't know what she was saying that about. But God is beside himself that people have become so consumed by evil. And Scripture says that he regretted even creating us in the first place. He is heartbroken. And so if we look at God's response, it would be easy to focus on the flood and say, well, he just reset the whole human race. That's what he did. That's his response. I think we have to go a little bit deeper than just the flood. There's more to God's response than that. Listen to what verse 8 says. Verse 8 says, "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." God had decided to wipe out everything he'd created, and he would have, except for one man, one righteous man. Because God found someone redeemable, he chose to provide a means of continuing his creation instead of abandoning it. That's what God does. That's his response. What's the takeaway for us? We are surrounded by evil. You don't have to look very far to find it. I don't know about you, but this is where I'm at sometimes. There are times where I just wish God would push the reset button. Like, can we just be done with this nonsense, with all the junk that's going on in the world? Can we just be done, God? Satan has such broad influence in the world. He gets a hold of someone, and here's what's easy. When he gets a hold of someone, we know it's easy to write them off. We can abandon them. We'll just leave them to their own devices. So what neighbors do you have that you've abandoned because they've been overwhelmed by evil? Maybe it's a friend or a family member who's chosen a lifestyle of addiction or sexual immorality or some other sin, and you just written them off. Nothing I can do for them. Can I ask you just a question? If there's somebody in your life that you've written off that way, can you find something redeemable in them? Can you find just a little glimpse of something redeemable in them? That's what God did with humanity. He found a little glimpse. And depending on what you read, some people say that the population of the earth at the time of the flood was 7 billion. I'm not sure. Some people say it was 750 million. It doesn't matter. There were a lot of people on the earth, and one one was righteous. God found that one thing that was redeemable, and he redeemed it. God didn't give up on humanity when it had given into sin. If that person you've given up on is still breathing, God hasn't given up on them. They are still redeemable. Jesus is still available to them. He is still more powerful than the sin that has captured them. No matter how wicked they are, the thing is, if God hasn't given up on them, neither should we. You can't save them. You can't. But you can show them the love of the one who can. You can show them the love of Jesus. So God is brokenhearted by evil. What else is he brokenhearted by? This story comes from the book of Jeremiah, again in the Old Testament. And the book of Jeremiah, Israel's in a bad place. Things are not going well. The country is divided. People have constantly turned their backs on God. They've chased after false gods. They've chased after idols. The leaders have strayed further and further from God. Things are bleak. That doesn't sound like anything that's happening in culture today. Nothing. Maybe we could learn something from God's response. In this story, things are bleak and they're about to get worse. In Jeremiah chapter 8, we see this conversation between God and the prophet Jeremiah. And they're talking back and forth, and God says to Jeremiah, this is going to be bad. The Babylonians are about to come, and they're going to roll over you guys. They're going to desecrate the nation of Israel. They're going to defile the tombs of the dead. And Jeremiah responds. He says, my people are crushed, and I am crushed, and I mourn, and horror grips me. Jeremiah is brokenhearted. Jeremiah is afraid. And then listen to what God says in Jeremiah chapter 9, starting in verse 7. It says this, therefore, this is what the Lord Almighty says, see, I will refine and test them. For what else can I do? What else can I do because of the sin of my people? God is distraught over his people turning away. He says, their tongue is a deadly arrow, it speaks deceitfully. With their mouths they speak cordially to their neighbors, but in their hearts they set traps for them. Should I not punish them for this? Declares the Lord. Should I not avenge myself on such a nation as this? I will weep and wail for the mountains and take up lament concerning the wilderness and grassland. They are desolate and untraveled, and the lowing of cattle is not heard. The birds have all fled, the animals have gone. I will make Jerusalem a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, and I will lay waste to the towns of Judah so no one can live there. Who is wise enough to understand this? Who has been instructed by the Lord and can explain it? Why has the land been ruined and laid waste like a desert that no one can cross? Listen to verse 13 and 14. This is what breaks God's heart. The Lord said, it's because they have forsaken my law, which I set before them. They have not obeyed me or followed my law. Instead, they have followed the stubbornness of their hearts. They have followed the Baals as their ancestors taught them. Here we see God brokenhearted because his people had turned their back on him. His people had turned away, and they stubbornly chose. Stubbornness is a word that you're going to hear a lot today. It might have something to do with it. They stubbornly chose to follow their own desires rather than be obedient to their Creator. And here's the thing. God has seen this play out over and over and over again in Israel with his people. He heaps favor on them, and then something happens and they turn away. And God says, okay, if you're going to follow what you're going to follow, and he lets them reap what they've sown. And then when things get bad enough, when they mess things up sufficiently, then they come crawling back to God. It's like, oh God, you are our protector. You are our provider and our shield and our strength, and we're turning back to you now. And then he again shows favor on them as soon as they turn back to him. That happens over and over in Israel. Rinse, lather, repeat. It is the same thing every time. It's still happening today, by the way. We do this. In this case, God's people have abandoned him, and he doesn't intervene when Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians attack. He doesn't stand in the gap because they have turned their back on him, and they hit rock bottom for 70 years. For 70 years, they're exiled into Babylon, into slavery. Now, eventually, God rescues them, but not before allowing them to reap what they've sown. Now, here's what I want you to know. Even during the 70 years, even during the captivity, even when he had let these things happen, when they had reaped what they had sown, even when that had happened, God did not abandon them. He remained present. All they had to do was turn to him. That's all they had to do. And they didn't. He didn't turn his back on his people. In fact, he reveals his presence to his people through the faith of people like Daniel. Daniel remains faithful to God, and God delivers him through these trials. God shows that he's present if they would only turn to him. So what's the takeaway? We can't escape the fact that actions have consequences. We do things, and there are natural consequences to what we do. When people turned away from God and followed their own path, God let them. He let them. And they reaped what they sowed, but even when they had turned their back on him, he didn't turn his back on them. He remained present. All they had to do was turn to him, but they wouldn't. So what happens when we have people in our lives who turn away from God, who turn their back on God? I know that many people in this room have friends and family members who have turned their back on God. And their stubborn heart chases the desires of their heart, and they chase after the things like the people of Israel did, false idols. They make bad decisions, decisions that might be life-changing. And we can't shield them from the consequences. We can't. And I mean, we've all been there. You see the train wreck coming. It is coming. You can see it. It's about to happen. And you, more than anything in the world, you just want to stop it, but you can't. They have to choose their way out of this mess. What you can do, you can't stop it, but you can remain present. You can remain present. Continue to be available to them. Continue to love them well. You can be mad. You can be disappointed, frustrated, hurt. You can be all of those things. It's okay to have those emotions. But the most important emotion you should have is hope. Because God's not done working. And so you need to be there for them when they're on their way down. You need to be there for them when they hit rock bottom. Because they're going to need a hand. They're going to need someone to help them up. We have seen this happen in our lives. be present. God is brokenhearted when we turn our back on him, but he never goes away. We can learn from his example. Let's switch from the Old Testament to the New and look at how Jesus responds when he is brokenhearted. One of the most powerful miracles in the Bible is Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. And it's in the lead up to that event where we find Jesus being brokenhearted. It's in John chapter 11, starting in verse 33. So let me just set the stage for you. Jesus has these friends, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, and he loves them. And he has a relationship with them. And so when Lazarus is sick, Mary and Martha, they reach out to Jesus. They send a message to Jesus. Hey, Jesus, we need you to come. Lazarus is sick. And Jesus opts to stay where he is and continue to do ministry. And then a couple days later, he goes. But in that time where he delayed, Lazarus dies. And so when he gets there, Mary and Martha are they're distraught. Jesus, why weren't you here? Why didn't you come when we called you? You could have stopped all this from happening. And that's what Jesus runs into when he gets there. So let's pick up the story in verse 33. John 11:33 says, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him? But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Verse 38, Jesus, once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take away the stone, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he's been in there 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And then he says, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus comes out. Now, I want to be clear about something. Jesus is brokenhearted. He is grieving because his friend has died, and his other friends, Mary and Martha, are grieving because their brother has died. He grieves with those who grieve. He mourns with those who mourn. So he weeps. But the Greek words that are used in verse 33, where it says he's deeply moved in spirit and troubled, they point to something a little different. They point to frustration. Jesus is agitated with what is happening. And the people around, they all offer these assumptions like, well, this is why he's upset. Well, this is why he's upset. And they're all wrong. They're all wrong. And then in verse 38, we see the same phrasing used. Jesus is agitated and frustrated with what is happening. And in verse 40, we find out why he's agitated. He's agitated by their doubt and their disbelief. Jesus is brokenhearted when we doubt him, when we disbelieve in his power. He says, did I not tell you that if you just believe, you will see the glory of God? I told you. You can believe me. My word is true. Now, I got to be honest, you can't blame Mary and Martha because death has this kind of air of finality about it. And I don't know of anyone who's been raised from the dead after 4 days. You can't blame Mary and Martha for having doubt. But Jesus is broken because of this doubt that they have. And he says, no, trust me, believe me, know that the things I say are true. And so, troubled by their doubt and disbelief, what does he do? What is Jesus' response? He prays. His response is prayer. The doubt and disbelief of his friends, of his family, Jesus responds to with prayer. And verse 41 tells us that Jesus prayed with absolute confidence. He didn't thank God for what he was about to do. He thanked God for what he had already done. The victory has been won. And so Jesus prays with absolute confidence. And he wraps up his prayer with this, asking God to, God, cure their disbelief. Fix their doubt. Help them to see that they can trust me. What's the takeaway? It's not about raising Lazarus, because I don't know anybody in this room that can raise someone from the dead after 4 days. It's not even about grieving with the sisters. Like, we can do that, and we should. We should grieve with those who grieve and mourn with those who mourn. The takeaway is our response to doubt and disbelief. And the way we respond is by praying in absolute confidence. We should have absolute confidence when we pray to God. Do you know anybody who doubts God? Maybe not, unbelievers. Of course they doubt God. They don't even believe he exists. But here's what I can tell you. I think there are people in this room right now who doubt what God can do, who doubt his power. They can't wrap their heads around the fact that God can literally do anything. And so when they pray without confidence. And they go through life, they trudge through life just wondering when God's going to let them down again. When's it going to happen this time? What's he going to let me down with this time? It's like they've completely lost hope and faith and trust that who Jesus says he is, he is. The battle is already won. We can't pray with confidence. So Jesus shows us what our response should be for people who doubt. Pray with confidence. Thank God for what he has already done. The battle is won. God, thank you that the battle is won. God, thank you that you hear my prayer every time I lift it to you. God, I pray that if there's doubt in this room, that you would cure their disbelief, that you would lead them to trust you. Amen. Do you have a neighbor who's doubting? Who doesn't believe in whole or in part what God's capable of? Pray for them. And pray in confidence, because God can reach them. There's nothing that he can't do. Oh yeah, did I say pray in confidence? I mean pray in confidence. Pray in confidence. Pray in confidence. That's the takeaway for today. Pray in confidence. Okay? Pray in confidence. God can do anything. And can I just say this? There is nothing that I can do to remove your doubt. There is nothing that you can do to remove someone else's doubt. The only one who can remove doubt is Jesus. And he can. We just need to ask him. All right, one last story. These first three stories are about Jesus' response to other people and what breaks his heart about them. This story is about us. This story is about you and me. We find it in Mark chapter 3. So it's the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Jesus is in the synagogue on the Sabbath. Mark chapter 3, starting in verse 1, says this. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. Go back to the beginning of that verse 5. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed. God is brokenhearted. Jesus is brokenhearted. And this one isn't about the people who don't believe. It's not about the people who've been consumed by evil. This is about people who know God. This is about you and me. And what Jesus is brokenhearted about is when his people become apathetic to the needs of other people. The word that is used here to describe what Jesus said, the word is parosis. It literally means to grow a callus over your heart so you can't feel any longer. It is developing a thick skin so you're not heartbroken by the needs of people anymore. I have been this person who just, you know what? I see a need. I can't do anything about that. And so I protect myself by building this callus up around my heart so I don't feel bad for not helping. The man in this story has probably lost his job. He's probably lost his ability to provide for his family. And Jesus is distressed because the people don't care. Because the people don't care. Jesus is so distressed by their lack of care for their neighbor. And he says, "You may not care, but I do." And so he meets the need. He cares more for the needs of people than he does for the approval of man. What's the takeaway? Jesus is always aware of the needs of people around him. Now, this one is pretty obvious. He's got a hand that is withered, right? You can see it plain as day. And I know we look around this room, there are needs in this room right now. I know that they're not all obvious. But Jesus is aware of those things and willing to meet them, to do whatever he can to meet them. That's where we should be. Not callous, not uncaring, not ignoring the need like the Pharisees would. We cannot ignore the needs of others. We can't miss the needs of others because they don't fit into our neat little box. We take care of this need at this church. We don't really take care of those needs. I'm happy to help with this need, but not that need. That's not where Jesus was. And that's not where he expects us to be. So what do we see in the stories? What do we see in the stories today? We see a God who is troubled and brokenhearted by evil, but he does not give up on people. We see a God who is troubled by people who turned away from him, but he remains present in their lives and available to them if they would only turn to him. We see Jesus who is troubled by people's doubt and disbelief, but what he does is he responds with a prayer of confidence, knowing that God hears his prayer. And then we see Jesus troubled by the callousness of our hearts and demonstrating care even when we don't. So what's your live it out assignment this week? Pray with confidence? No, it's not going to be that easy. You should pray with confidence. Your live it out assignment is to respond the way God responds. We know people who fit into every one of these categories. People who have been overwhelmed by evil, people who have turned their back on God, people who doubt him, people who have become callous to the needs of others. We know people who have fit into these categories. Your live it out assignment this week is to engage with those people, to not give up on those people. If there's someone that you have not been in touch with because you have given up on them, reach out to them this week. Be present in their lives. Do not give up on them because God has not, and neither should we. Pray in confidence that God will eliminate the doubt in their minds and then remove the callous from your own heart. Look around. Lift your head up. See the needs of people around you. Look for them. Ask about them. And then be willing to do something about it. I know you can't meet every need, but we can meet a whole lot of needs together. God does amazing things. He brings people out of evil and into life. He restores people who have turned their back on him. He brings back the people who have doubt in him. He does all of that, and we can count on it if we are just attentive, if we just respond the way he does. Would you stand with us as we worship him?
I search